BBC 5 Live.
The real sounds of Africa there to once again kick off our World Football Voting. And this morning we're talking football in Europe and South America and players from over there playing in our leagues. If you'd like to join in the conversation, the number to call is 08085 909 693. That's 08085 909 693. Or you can text us on 85058. or email upallnight@bbc.co.uk. So, representing the fair continent of Europe and the football that's played there, and indeed the players from over there playing in our leagues, is the one and only Galatasaray. We call him Paul Serres. Hello, Paul.
Good morning.
Good to speak to you. And with regards to South America and the players from over there playing in our leagues, the Legendino, we call him Tim Vickery. Good morning, Tim.
Good morning. You refer to Europe there as the fair continent. Does that mean by the omission that South America is the unfair?
Yeah, the dark continent. Yeah, very dark.
It probably is in many ways.
Yeah. In many. Well, no, I was thinking, in terms of nighttime and everything, dark continent, isn't it? You don't want to be lost in the Amazon when it's dark.
No, I think most places are quite dark at night time, though. I'll let you into that little secret.
I'm up all night. What would I know about that? Anyway, now if we can put the jokes to one side. Yeah, tonight, Paul, is it fair to say that Scotland is a European territory? For the purposes of our conversation, is it fair to say that?
Yeah, of course, absolutely.
Yeah, it's foreign, isn't it? Scotland,
it is, definitely.
Well, okay, Paul, this is our listener, Paul, says, on the subject of Steve Gerrard taking on the Rangers job, I personally think it's a big gamble for him. He must have had some assurances from the Rangers board about money available for new players, etc. I remember John Barnes going to Celtic in a similar position, and he had it rough up there. I do wish him, I presume that's Steve Gerrard, luck, though, and would love to see him do well, as the Rangers fans deserve success and silverware. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think it's in a way it's pretty straightforward, really. I mean, the job at hand is to catch, not only catch but surpass the old enemy from across the city, Celtic. If they don't do that under Steven Gerrard and pretty quickly, you'd think that whatever assurances have been made and whatever contracts have been signed probably aren't going to be worth the paper that they've been written on, and he won't last very long, a la John Barnes. I think there's one huge difference between Barnes and Gerrard, in that Kenny Dalglish was director of football at Celtic when John Barnes took over, and he not only a great player, of course, and a club legend at Celtic, Dalglish, but extensive managerial experience, knew John Barnes well, was a real buffer between between Barnes and a huge club and his first managerial job, and somebody there to hold his hand. And not sure Gerrard's got that. I know that he's going to take some of his under-18 staff, some of the academy staff from Liverpool with him, but it's a very, very big job for Gerrard. And he could have quite comfortably taken any number of jobs. He said he's been offered 8 or so since he retired from playing in the English lower leagues. It's a real bit of a cliche, but it's a baptism of fire to go up to Glasgow and take over at either of those two huge clubs. So interesting to see. I think talk that, Ali McCoyster said that it reinvigorates Scottish football, puts it back on the map. Not sure it was ever really off the map, to be honest. It's one of the biggest footballing cities in the world, and it's one of the great derby matches, of course, Rangers and Celtic. I'm not as convinced that it's going to be a success as many people seem to be, but we'll see. I mean, we've got very little to judge Steven Gerrard's managerial career on thus far, but he's only 37, and it's some job to take as your first job.
Yeah, Tim, I do want your point of view of this as well, but let me just give you an instance. And, on this program, we try and stay away from the tribalism, apart from when we stick the boot into Spurs, of course. But Rod is sent us a text, and you can see, or email, you can see where part of what Steven Gerrard is going to meet up there, although he might have been used to it in Liverpool. But Rod says, Steven Gerrard has signed up to manage the Rangers. As a Celtic supporter, I'd like to see him fail. In the respective regions, who are the biggest name players to fail in management? And answer that part whenever you want to.
Well, I suppose all of them, because all managerial, there's that phrase about political careers. Every political career ends in failure. I think much the same is true of managerial careers as well. The vast majority are doomed to failure. I'm just intrigued there by listening to Paul talk about Steve Gerrard, and if I can kind of sum up what I thought was your message in 2 words, it seems to me, Paul, that you're thinking it's too early. It's too early.
Well, it might not be. It might be an inspired move.
That's worse than my Scouts. That's terrible, honestly, Tim. That was terrible. Anyway, go on.
But one of the things, and Rod's text alludes to that. One of the things that he's walking into is just that Glasgow atmosphere, which I know that there is a little bit of that in Liverpool, isn't there? Because there are patterns of immigration that aren't totally dissimilar. But I think it's just it's on a different level in Glasgow. So it is a real pressure cooker to step into. If I could ask Paul, what do you think would have been the safer route? He's obviously climbing Everest by the most difficult route, by starting off at Glasgow Rangers. What do you think would have been a more cautious, step-by-step, easier route to climb Everest?
I think that his status at Liverpool was such that he could have spent a decade in the system there, and almost sort of gone back to the boot room of the way of doing things at Anfield, and being prepared over the course of a number of years to maybe even take over at Liverpool. I'm not suggesting that would be an easier job than Rangers, but certainly in terms of surroundings, people, his status at the club, he's a legend at Liverpool and respected right across the board, from the ball boys all the way through to the directors of the club. So I think a year looking after the under-18s there. I've got a huge respect for Steven Gerrard for taking on such a job, and he'll either be a resounding success or he'll be home by Christmas. It's that cut and dry really when you take over at a club like Rangers, and when you take over at either of the Glasgow clubs, I think, and it's really difficult to see how it's going to go, and like I said, we've got very little to go on really, but if he's going to be a success in management, then these are the kinds of jobs that he will garner the best experience from. So it's potentially great for Scottish football. Scotland needs 2 strong teams. We've seen the performances, Celtic's performances in European competition tail off really with a lack of credible competition north of the border on a consecutive season by season basis. 7 league titles in a row. They did so at a canter really this year, despite it being closer than more recent seasons. But I don't know. I would have expected him to. He was very close to taking the MK Dons job, wasn't he, last year? And he said it was too soon. So I'm not sure what he thinks that a year in the under-18 Premier League is going to set him up for in terms of it being too soon for MK Dons last year. But you can't really turn down a job like that, I guess, if you want to go into football management and somebody offers it to you. So fair enough.
One of the ironies of this is that we've seen many coaches come from Scotland to manage in the English leagues, and this is the other way around. It's like that conversation we often have, isn't it, Tim, about South America's, how many European coaches go and coach in South America. It's usually the other way around.
There are a few Spaniards who've gone over to South America recently and are doing interesting work. But perhaps also, to flip this one back, the need to appoint a novice coach, all right, with a big name as a player, but a novice coach from England, perhaps sheds light on the end of that tradition of the great Scottish coach, or managers as they were in the day, you know, where so many of them came through from very, very similar backgrounds, you know, mining communities or shipbuilding communities. And perhaps the decline of that working class culture in Scotland has filtered through to Scottish football and also to the managers as well, because you think of the contribution that the Scottish managers made to English football. It is absolutely immense.
Huge,
and the vast majority of them come from very similar backgrounds. And I think Ferguson was probably the last of the Mohicans on that one.
Well, hang on a second though. Is it the end of that tradition, Paul, or is it just the consequences of the exports market, if you like?
Yeah, I think Scottish football generally has been in the doldrums for probably going on a couple of decades. And Tim's right that Ferguson was the last of those. I think,
but not the managers though. People like David Moyes, okay, he hasn't done well of late, but you know what he did at Everton and so on. So many managers coming from Scotland with a Scottish background, and now suddenly it dries up. It doesn't dry up overnight, that kind of tradition, does it? And I was just wondering whether they're suffering the consequences. Yeah, it has, but I wonder whether they're suffering the kind of same export consequence that Brazilian football is suffering with its footballers being exported to Europe so frequently. Then it leaves a dearth back home, but it doesn't necessarily stop the supply coming, does it? No,
I mean, I think that the game in England particularly has changed. You know, we've caught up with the rest of Europe in terms of the system, and we're loath to give an individual that much power nowadays at a football club. We have directors of football in place as a buffer between the owner and the manager these days, and you don't get managers anymore in football in the Premier League. You get head coaches, and you know you get transfer boards that are made up of ex-players and directors that set about getting your targets in. And I think that football clubs take a longer view these days because jobs are so easily lost in terms of managerial jobs, head coach jobs, that clubs have to take a longer view. And it's almost, you know, clubs are run by under-secretaries of state rather than the president these days. And, you know, it's the permanent secretaries, the directors, the director of football, whose job is not so much dependent upon results on the pitch, that have an awful lot more power. And in that new landscape, I think that the days of the disciplinarian firebrand manager who came in and took charge of every aspect of the club from the bottom up, that, you know, it's a bit dated now. It's gone.
And listen, we'll go to callers now. And Tim, you must remind me afterwards to tell you why I stuck the boot into the spuds. Okay, just remind me about that later on. I'll come on to that. I'm
not sure I've got every interest in reminding you, but
no, you have actually. You have.
You've just awoken my curiosity.
I'll remind you. Don't worry.
Yeah, well done, Paul. Yeah, I'll declare an interest.
I'll delegate that one to Sam.
Yeah, exactly. I'll declare an interest fast. So we'll come on to Ahmed in London in a moment. But first, Stephen in Manchester. Good morning.
Hello to yourself and to your panel. As I'm very, very fond of history, what comes to my mind is that quotation, Supercaligo ballistic, Celtic are atrocious. And I think that wasn't the era of John Barnes, if I'm not mistaken.
Was that Paul?
Was it? Yeah, it must have been
Supercaligo
close.
ballistic, Celtic are atrocious.
It might well have been, yeah.
Paul's too
the man
young.
with the team that beat Celtic. It's in that word.
Exactly. Paul's too young to remember all that history, mate.
I'm not too young. I do remember it.
But we do love a bit of history. Those of us who are old enough to know what history is, Stephen. So feel free to.
If I were to follow the confrontation, so to speak, between England and the North African countries, i.e. North African nations, in 1986, I remember Morocco wasn't a very easy side to beat. If anything, I remember one of the England players was sent off for not being happy and throwing the ball at the referee because he was so frustrated that Morocco was putting a great performance.
Was it Ray Wilkins?
I think it was, yeah. It was.
Yeah, and the story there was Brian Robson, who was the England captain, had come back from a dislocated shoulder. And he wasn't really 100%. And the Morocco team, who defended exceptionally well, they're a very difficult team.
I remember that game.
and they had a terrific goalkeeper. But off the ball, one or two of the Moroccans were kind of yanking on Brian Robson's shoulder, and he had to go off, and that was the end of the tournament for him. And Ray Wilkins just went spare. I remember watching it thinking, he's going to get sent off. He just totally lost his head, and he'd lost his head because he was so angry with the treatment that his mate Brian Robson was getting his shoulder yanked out.
By the way, Tim, I'm visually impaired. I cannot give the description of what was going on. I can simply rely upon what the commentator was saying, because I can speak 2 languages, including Arabic. And I remember the game against
Didier Dog was very angry about it.
I know we can hear that. Stephen, apologise for the dog in the background. It's Didier Dogba, he gets to bark whenever he wants.
He's still angry about it. And I talked to him even to this day about Brian Robson's shoulder. And he's not happy at all.
He's not having it tonight. Anyway, carry on, Stephen, yeah?
I remember Alan Green predicting that England is going to defeat Algeria about at least 4-0. Yet the performance of Algeria in 2010 was far superior technically to what England was. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, that Wayne Rooney, for instance, was completely neutralised. As against Tunisia in 1998, okay, I remember David Beckham was sidelined, inverted commas, by Glenn Hoddle on that day. But what I can recall accurately was the fact that Tunisia did not play one of their major strikers that was injured 2 weeks before the game. It's called Hassan Gebsi. Same as this year, I'm only assuming that the main striker of Tunisia, called Youssef Msekni, who used to play for my club, Esperance, is no longer there. So, having said that, I don't think England is going to be given an easy ride. North African sides never gave England an easy ride, as far as I can remember.
Yeah. Paul, what do you reckon?
No. I mean, it was a fairly straightforward win, I think, for England against Tunisia last time in 1998. And I think that, the things that the dark arts that we were talking about in the 86 World Cup there with Brian Robson and Butch Wilkins, I think those kinds of things now have been almost eradicated with the increasing sanitisation of the game at international level, particularly in the World Cup, and the advantage. I think it's possible that if those sorts of things you were still able to get away with them. I think with this young England squad, inexperienced at this level, I think nobody really in the starting 11 with more than 40 or 50 caps, which in these days saturated with international football, it's quite rare, I think.
What about in terms of goalkeeping? How healthy is the goalkeeping side of England this year?
Well, very. I mean, I think very. The situation is a strange one, to be perfectly honest, because we've all seen Joe Hart's demise over the last couple of seasons, and we've all seen the rise in the current players that are involved at international level. Jack Butland, Jordan Pickford. Going further down, Tom Heaton, Nick Pope, but between them, none of them have reached double figures. And I think between the posts, I mean, none of them have got even as many caps as Peter Shilton has got at a World Cup. I think Shilton played 17 World Cup matches. And experience is so key in those, particularly in between the posts and in central defence. So I think this England team is something of an unknown quantity going into the World Cup this year. And we've had various very experienced squads in recent international tournaments up to 2010, even 2014, and they've largely been very disappointing. So Southgate's remit has been to come in and to freshen things up, to bring the young lads through that he coached at under 21 level into the full team. He's done that. The payoff is, the way the balance, I guess, is that those young lads don't have the experience of the older lads, but then on the other hand, they don't have the hang-ups. They don't have the fear. That shirt is particularly heavy, I think, for a lot of England players of the recent past, and very few of those that have excelled at club level have gone on to do so wearing the Three Lions.
Tim, I think it's fair enough for you to answer this one.
I don't know.
Who let the dog out?
Yeah, there you go.
He doesn't want to answer,
say hello
does
to
he?
Didier Dogba anyway.
Yeah, he doesn't want to answer, does he?
No, I'm sitting shamefaced because he's not supposed to do that. I'm going to rip his vocal cords out.
No, you're not. We loved it. We loved it. He's part of the team. He's part of the wider Well, I think we've had enough of that one. He gets the joke now, but it was a good joke, wasn't it? You weren't expecting that. Be honest, Tim. You weren't expecting that. We dropped it on you right.
I always expect the unexpected.
No, exactly. That's exactly. I'll tell you what. When the head of Radio 4 said that, always expect the unexpected on Radio 4. And
I thought you were going to say, who let the dogs out? That's not a very Radio 4 thing to say.
No, I thought, and she's a wonderful woman, by the way, who was my boss at one point. I thought she was actually quoting from World Football Phone-In. Expect the unexpected. Yeah, indeed. Ahmed in London is with us. Hello.
Hello. How are you guys doing?
Very well. Oh, by the way, thanks to Stephen in Manchester for the call a moment or two ago. Ahmed, what do you want to say?
I had a question for both guys, both Tim and for Paul.
Yeah.
So for Paul, I wanted to go ahead and ask is about Queen's Park Rangers. And a couple of years ago, they had a lot of money and they were getting all these Champions League winners into their team. Guys like Julio Cesar, Dribble Cisse, Park Ji-sung, all of those guys, Jose Baswinga, another one. And in the span of 3 years, they managed to get themselves relegated twice, in spite of spending more on wage than teams like Atletico Madrid and Borussia Dortmund did. And I just wanted to ask, how does that happen? Like, how does a team that's spending that much money get relegated? Like, not even finish in the top 10, but get relegated.
And what was your question for Tim?
Not even come back when they're relegated.
What was the question for Tim?
For Tim, I wanted to go ahead and ask about Kleberson. So, I've heard Tim talk about Kleberson before on the radio, and what he always seems to say about Kleberson is that the Manchester United guys would wait for his girlfriend to turn 15 or 16 or something like that. And 16, I found that a bit weird. I was like, didn't Adam Johnson get arrested for something similar like that?
Well, hold on. Let's not compare those two. But and just to clarify, it was 16 that you were saying, Tim, yeah?
Yeah. So there is no criminal contact involved here, and it was perhaps a sign of someone who wasn't quite mature enough for the challenge of living abroad and delivering every week at that stage in his career. And he had been the second best player on the field in the World Cup final. He had a terrific World Cup in 2002. It was a very strange World Cup, 2002. It came very early. In a bid to avoid the rainy season in Japan and South Korea. So it started at the end of May, and it came at a time when the European season had been expanded. There were 2 group phases in the Champions League, with the conclusion that almost everyone who played the European season was out of gas, which did give an advantage to those who hadn't played the European season. Hence, you see great performances from even South Korea or Turkey, who've never done anything since in World Cups. Sorry, Paul. And certain players like Kleberson, who was still playing in domestic Brazilian football, I think he was physically full of gas. And he really shone in that World Cup and never shone to anything like the same degree afterwards. He did go to the World Cup in South Africa as a reserve midfielder in 2010 and was a thoroughly competent all-rounder. But I think one of the things that you have to conclude, looking back on it, is that it was the expectation from the 2002 World Cup was a false one. He had a physical advantage in that World Cup that we never saw again afterwards. And I hope he enjoyed the moment, because he didn't have that many great top-class moments afterwards.
Okay, and Ahmed, thanks a lot for the question. We'll come back to yours in a moment, Paul. But okay. Alison in Leeds, thanks for calling. Hello, Alison.
Hello.
What's happened?
My poor dog.
Yeah.
Working. I do nightlife photography.
Yeah.
And she was fast asleep on the bed near me, snuggled up in all the pillows, and suddenly she nearly jumped from one side of the bed to the other with an enormous bark, and I wonder what the hell was going on. And it was that dog on the radio.
I'm innocent. You're going to have to blame Tim for that one. I'm completely innocent. But Tim,
guilty, Your Honour. Guilty as charged.
Did you?
She nearly had a heart attack.
So did I. Okay, fair enough. Your dog. What about us? What?
And I know they had a heart attack as well, because she nearly landed on my knee.
And what about Tim? Did your dog hear when Tim left the microphone to go and deal with the dog? And the dog carried on barking.
Yes.
I had someone here this afternoon put in my internet connection, and he was here for about an hour and a half. And for that entire hour and a half, he didn't stop yakking once. An hour and a half. At the end of it, I had such a headache. I wanted to throw him over the wall, and I live on the 20th floor. 20 flight rock. It's a long way down. Yeah. But I know I don't mistreat him.
No, I know.
I shall be still be.
Oh, Alison, you're breaking up.
I said I shall be telling Phil Williams about this.
You let him know. You let him know.
My dog's very famous on Phil's show because we enter his music competition nearly every night. So he knows my dog's name very well.
And what is your pooch's name?
Jazzy.
Jazzy. My mate is Jazzy B, but this obviously yours is Jazzy A. Isn't it? I'll tell Jazzy B that Jazzy A was woken up. And also, can we name this officially the barking hour? Is that okay, Alison?
Well, as long as you want me in advance.
I'm warning you in advance now. We've got half an hour of the barking hour to go, and I'm going to ask listeners to tell us their best dog football anecdotes.
Right.
So there might be a bark or two coming up. You have been warned.
Right, okay. Well,
I've got a feeling.
I'll tell Jazzy.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I've got a feeling that Jazzy might stay awake for another half hour. And thank you very much for telling us about it. I do apologise to Jazzy from us. Tell Jazzy it's all Tim's fault. It's that bloke in South America.
I nearly had to give a mouth-to-mouth resuscitation.
Well, I can understand why, because you see, Didier Drogba, that's the dog that woke your Jazzy up. His name is Didier Drogba, and he was speaking in Portuguese, you see. He was barking in Portuguese. And I can understand your dog, being a proper Yorkshire dog, thought, what's that? Somebody's barking in Portuguese. Oh, I can't get asleep.
Well, initially I thought she must have been dreaming.
Yeah, what a dream, eh? What a dream.
And then I suddenly heard the dog on the radio and I realised what had gone on.
The dog was saying, obrigado, Portugal, campañones, Portugal. That's what the dog was saying in barking. Why is everybody in the studio laughing at me? Honestly, I was translating dog bark for you. Why are you all shaking your heads? It's still me. It's still Dotton. I haven't lost my mind. I haven't gone barking mad. I'm just trying to translate it for you. Anyway, Alison, thank you very much. Really appreciate that. The legendino Tim Vickery is representing South American footballers from there playing in our leagues. And we've got the Galatasaray's, Paul Serras, arguing the case for European football and players from over here as well. And incidentally, Paul, when I asked for text on football and dogs connected, and anecdotes on it. Well, Dennis in Grantham has gone for the obvious one. You know what the obvious one is, don't you?
Pickles.
Yeah, indeed. Surely the most famous dog associated with football must be Pickles for finding the stolen World Cup trophy in 1966. Those were the days. You cannot imagine any of these trophies being nicked nowadays. But can you imagine, World Cup, we win the World Cup and somebody nicks it? Dear, oh dear. Anyway, the question that Ahmed was asking you is about the demise of QPR. Once upon a time, they were able to import all these footballers from overseas, great footballers, European and otherwise. And then what happened?
Yeah, well, they got relegated, and they've not really been seen since. It's difficult, really. I mean, it's that age-old question, isn't it, about whether. I mean, look, we had a lead there in the news about Brighton and their win over Manchester United this evening, and another year of Premier League football for them. And I think, in comparison, that QPR and this Brighton are about as far removed from each other as you can get. Both were looking for the same thing, that is survival in the Premier League and competition at the highest level in English football, and they both went about it in completely different ways. Now, I'll be honest, I as harsh as it would have been, I would have thought the sensible thing to do, considering past record, would have been for Brighton, upon their promotion to the Premier League, to look for a new manager. I mean, I know that that's a terrible thing, and I'll probably get a fair amount of abuse for that, because Chris Hughton is a very good coach, very well thought of. But let's be honest, he's struggled desperately in the Premier League in the past, and I know a lot of it is down to the quality of player that you have available, and there's a perceived lack of ruthlessness in Hughton in saying thanks to the players that have got him promoted, but moving them on. It's almost remaining a bit too loyal to those players that have got him there in the first place. But he's proved me wrong. He's done very, very well this season. And he's done it without any superstars there at the club. He's done it, staying loyal to those players that have brought him up from the Championship with Brighton. And they've got their rewards, and they've done so having enjoyed a sensational season. And if you look at the most recent Premier League incarnation of QPR that were relegated in 2013, they were the opposite of that. There were ex-Champions League winners coming in for one final big contract. There was a coach in Harry Redknapp who doesn't seem. I mean, Redknapp is a successful coach, in Premier League history. He's won things. He's done well in his career, but as a person and as a coach, I think he's completely the opposite end of the scale to Chris Hughton. There's a sense of the mercenary about him, about Redknapp, and he was given. And again, it goes back to what we were talking about with the demise maybe of the Scottish manager. That Chris Hughton is a good head coach, and Redknapp was a manager, and I think Redknapp is probably a product of his time, and his time was coming to its conclusion when he was at QPR, and they had an imbalanced squad. Again, that was not anything to do with the board of directors or a transfer board, or it was on the manager, Redknapp, who chose to bring in those players. And it didn't work out. And by all accounts, when the dust had settled on that season, plenty of senior players in that squad came out and said that, quite simply, it was a divided dressing room. There were the haves and have-nots within the first team squad, those who were being paid because of their past reputation rather than what they were doing on the pitch. And they felt that, they'd been there and done that in England. And it was essentially a final payday before they left and carried on to other things. So combination of factors really, but probably a nod on, or a spotlight really on what we were talking about earlier about how the game has changed considerably in recent times. I mean, look at Eddie Howe, a great coach that's doing really well at Bournemouth, is not really involved in the decisions above the team. Doesn't have any superstars, and again, they will be safe this season and another season of Premier League football for them. So, football has changed. It's moved on, and QPR didn't move quite quickly enough.
Yeah, it's fascinating though, isn't it, Tim, that oh, by the way, we lost you for a moment, but you're on the phone with us now just to explain to people why there'll be different sound quality from you. I can't wait to hear how you sound on the phone when Didier Drogba has bitten all your wires for your internet connection and had a good chew at it, a good munch at it. You should feed him better, That's what he needs, a real juicy piece of steak.
I got to the grips of it. It was my better half had forgotten her key and was locked outside. So she was on the other side of the door. I didn't know. And the dog, that's what he was trying to tell me. It was nothing to do with Brian Robson's shoulder, after all. It was all him trying to open the door to let her in. Okay,
well, good for you. Good for you that you've done your civic duty, as it were. It's fascinating, though, what Paul has been saying about the demise of QPR. Despite, Ahmed's question was, they had a lot of money coming to the club, and they brought in all these players from overseas, a lot of European players who had won things and everything, and yet Paul's comparative study was Brighton and QPR. Brighton have done it a different way. Makes me think that it's like a business, isn't it? The business model is what makes a success, the business model. So it's not necessarily, I know, I'm not naive. I know, I get it. The players are really important. They're the most valuable asset. The coach is really important, sets the strategy. But before all of that, there's an a priori institution, the board, the chairman, the owner, whoever it might be, that sets the template for the business model. And that can make the difference between keeping you in. I'm arguing that maybe that's the most important thing when a team gets promoted. The business model has got to be right. Quite apart from everybody spends time thinking about the players that they're bringing in and the coach that they've got. But look at the business model.
Yeah, I'm not. I don't know. A business model, or I would certainly say the model. And football is such a strange business because the objective is not to make profit. The objective is to win titles or win promotion or whatever. So you're taking decisions that sometimes.
But it's success, though, isn't it, Tim? It's about success. Whether you're making money or you're taking titles, it's about success.
But I completely agree with the thing that the solidity of the institution is absolutely vital. And when football works, when it's well organised, then the institution supports the team. When it's badly organised, it's the other way around. The institution is dependent on the team getting a result at the weekend to calm things down politically. And maybe that was part of the problem at Queen's Park Rangers. Maybe the project was oversold. They promised something that they couldn't deliver in the timescale that they were trying to deliver it, so that they've then heaped expectations upon themselves. And when the team doesn't win, it just means there's a lot of criticism for the institution. And we see this all the time in South American football, because the South American clubs are really living hand to mouth. And so often in South America, the team is expected to support the institution. And if the team doesn't win, then the directors and so on are really in the firing line. And that's a terrible way to do things. When football is well organised, the institution supports the team. When it's badly organised, the team is supposed to support the institution.
Lots of calls. We'll get to Alan, who's our ref in Santa Monica, California, in a moment. But first, Steve in Bolton, you wanted to add a dog footballing anecdote into the mix. Feel free.
Yes, I did. My mother's first husband was Harry Catterick, the manager of Everton.
Wow, yeah.
Right. Now, the story goes that Bill Shankly used to take his dogs onto Everton's training pitch to do the food. No, I never witnessed that. No. But it sounds pretty good for Bill Shankly. It sounds about right, doesn't it?
He's a wily old Scot. He was a wily old Scot, wasn't he? Aye.
See you, Jimmy. Yeah, so I think it's probably true.
That is a good footballing anecdote. I really appreciate it as well, Steve. Thank you very much for that.
Do you know that the Botafogo used to have a dog, and this is back in the 40s and 50s, Biriba. He was black and white in the colours of Botafogo. And the president, who was deeply superstitious, used to smuggle him into the stands. And at strategic points in the game, where they needed to kind of halt the rhythm of the game, the president would just throw the dog onto the field to run around and calm it down. And also one of the superstitions that they had, before one of the games, the dog, rather like Bill Shankly's dog there, it performed a necessity on the team's right back. And they won. And for a superstitious club like Botafogo, that's bad news, because then, before every game, they've got to get the dog to do that over the poor old right back. I have a feeling that the right back probably scored 2 own goals, just to stop this happening, and say, it's not working anymore, we'll have to stop this practice.
Yeah, football and or football pitches and dogs don't go together, particularly when it comes to the sliding tackle, by the way. Steve, thank you very much. Alan in Santa Monica. Hello, how are you?
Yes, hello, good evening, good night, good morning.
Yeah, good. Depends where you are in the world. For you lot, it's good evening, isn't it?
Good evening.
For you and Tim. For you and Tim.
Yeah, I can still see the sunshine here in Santa Monica.
Okay, don't overdo it. Don't overdo it. We know. The sun shines brighter over Santa Monica, indeed. So, and you want to talk about refereeing?
Yes. I've obviously called before, and my pet subject is refereeing. But there's been a few things happening in recent weeks that made me worry a little bit about the safety and motivation of referees. I don't know if you saw the incredible scenes in Ethiopia where the referee is defending himself with a corner flag as the players and the coaches are attacking him. And then we saw the pictures a few weeks back in Turkey of the owner coming on the field with a gun on his side. And just even today, Mr. Trump's at the NRA telling the Americans to hang on to their guns. So I'm starting to get a little bit worried the next time I put out a red card if somebody's going to be chasing after me. So serious question, though. I mean, what about in the regions, the safety? Is it getting worse? And what about the motivation for refs? Where are they coming from? Where are you getting people to come out there? I'm sure they're not getting paid that much compared to the players, but no game can go ahead without the referee. And is this going to be a problem going forward, getting that grassroots numbers of referees out there in the different regions?
I don't know if you've seen this referee being chased by players in Ethiopia, Paul. It is quite shocking, actually, and I take your point, Alan. Which is the most dangerous place, you would say, in Europe for referees that you've experienced?
Well, just a point of order before I answer, if you don't mind, Don. It was in Greece, actually. The gun,
my apologies,
the team owner from PAOK Salonika came onto the pitch. Even Savidis came on, and he was pictured wagging his finger in the face of the referee, and calmly had a gun strapped to a holster on his belt, which obviously was made headlines around the world, and the league was suspended for a week while a full investigation took place. I don't think it's a new thing. I think it's a very serious thing. We see things, almost every week in the media over here that Sunday League referee was attacked or, verbally or physically attacked by a player that he had the gall to book or send off or disallowed a goal or, I just think that with the increasing media coverage of the game, and it's still increasing. We thought we'd reached saturation point, but it appears not. I think that we're more aware of it, and things like the Respect campaign and things that are good. I mean, they're good ideas. Don't get me wrong, but they ring quite hollow. I think for the most part, particularly if you're one of those referees who gives up a Sunday morning or a Saturday afternoon to go and, as you say, Alan, to ensure that the games go ahead around the country, and you have to spend the rest of the weekend in A&E or or whatever because you've taken a beating because you've dared to make a decision on the pitch. It's a situation that I can't really see a solution to be perfectly honest.
Which is the country in Europe that you'd least like to be a referee? Let me put it that way.
Well, I mean, I feel bad sort of singling any out when these things happen everywhere all the time. But
no, they happen everywhere. They happen everywhere in a context, whether it's parents getting angry about the way their children or whatever it might be. I do get that, but in a professional game, you would assume that the referee had not just the protection of stewards and the police and everything at the match, but there are all the sanctions that come with a professional game as well. And when players, like in this Ethiopian situation, are literally kicking and punching the referee after chasing him, it's horrible, it's horrible.
Yes,
and now I would immediately say, well, I wouldn't like to be a referee there. If despite all the possible sanctions that are available to protect a referee, players are still prepared to do that, well, that's anarchy, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm saying, which is the equivalent in Europe of a place where, despite all the sanctions and everything, you just wouldn't want to be a referee?
Well, certainly for certain games. I mean, in Belgrade, the Belgrade derby, the eternal derby, Red Star and Partizan would be the bottom of the list probably for me. To referee Panathinaikos Olympiakos in Athens, any of the Istanbul derbies. I mean, we've seen over the last couple of weeks, we've seen ridiculous situations in Istanbul where the second leg of the semi-final of the Turkish Cup between Besiktas and Fenerbahce was abandoned after an hour. Şenol Güneş, the coach of Besiktas, was hit by something in the crowd, had five stitches or five staples put in the top of his head. The game was ordered to be replayed from 57 minutes yesterday. Besiktas didn't turn up for the second leg, so Fenerbahce were there on their own. I mean, these kinds of things, you don't see these things really in Western Europe. These things are local generally, and I hate to make generalizations like this, but this is one of the things that attracts me to Turkish football, the anarchic side of things. You only really see these things in Turkey and in Greece and places like Serbia. So
I
anywhere
do get that. Yeah,
around
I do get that,
southeastern Europe, I would avoid being a referee, but somebody has to, and they have to be protected.
Well, this is the whole point. This is the whole point, Tim, because as much as Paul is right to say it's not nice to single out a particular country or particular league or whatever it might be, imagine if there is such a potential threat to the referees' lives, it's got to affect the way that the referee makes a decision, doesn't it?
Oh, clearly, and these people are under extraordinary pressure. I think it's one of the reasons that some of them want VAR to come in, just to get them off the hook a little bit. So there's someone else to blame. Because when VAR does come in fully, we're not going to be just shouting at the man in the middle. We're going to be shouting at the man watching the video screen. So maybe that helps take some of the pressure off. You do wonder sometimes why they do it. And if you want to make a career out of it, you've got to start early as well, because it's a relatively short career, and you've got to work your way up. But lots of people do have a passion for it, and without doubt, the worst place to do it was going back, say, 20 years or so, Colombia. When Colombia was really in the grip of the mad drug dealers who were betting huge sums on a game, and they were killing referees. Or wandering into the dressing room at half time carrying guns and so on, with conveying certain messages. But the treatment of referees all over the world, I think, is a disgrace. And this is something where everyone in football, especially club directors and managers and coaches, but also the media, I think they have to hold their hands up on this, and because everyone has an interest in stoking the fire, and it's wrong, and it has to stop. We have to stop spending so much time talking about refereeing decisions and accept that you can bring in VAR, you can use as many cameras as you like. There are still hugely important decisions in the context of the game which are down to interpretation and which are not questions of fact. I actually feel that some of the people going into refereeing here in Brazil are going into it with half an eye on, after being a referee, having a career of being a referee, a pundit on refereeing, because that's blanket in Brazilian TV. You've got your commentator, you've got your expert summariser, an ex-player, and you've got your refereeing specialist to talk about refereeing decisions. I don't think this is good, because I think that means you spend too much time talking about refereeing decisions. But it certainly seems to be a lucrative post-refereeing career for a lot of former referees. Yeah,
Keith points out that we love football and rugby here in Wales, but in rugby the ref has total control and respect, yet in soccer it's the opposite. This is from Sam in York. On the subject of Chris Hughton, the day Norwich fired him was the day I gave up supporting Norwich after 25 years. It hasn't surprised me where Brighton have ended up and where Norwich are now. That's how much I rate Hughton. Oh, and this is an interesting one. Sean in Cumbria says, I taught my dog to do a slide tackle to get his frisbee. And does that count? And she says also, he definitely reacted to Tim's dog distraction. You see, what we didn't realise was how many dogs all around the country have been woken up tonight and have been chasing their tail in a panic, going round in circles because they heard some dog in Portuguese barking some orders to his owner. Tim, open the door now.
Yeah,
how do you say that?
That's what he was saying.
How do you say that?
I didn't understand it.
Well, I did. How do you say that in Portuguese?
Abre a porta. Abre a porta.
Abre a porta. Abre a porta. Abre a porta. Abre a porta. We'll have more dog stories very shortly. We're talking football in Europe and South America and players from over there playing in our leagues. The Legendino, as ever, is in Rio answering any of your questions on South American football and players from over there in our leagues. And the Galatasaray Paul Serres is over this side, taking your calls and questions on football in Europe and players from over there playing in our leagues. And incidentally, for those of you who don't know, the barking hour is now officially over, okay? So let's stick to the purely footballing, well, as much as we can in any case, footballing matters. Mario in Limassol says the worst place to referee is probably Cyprus. Yeah. Haven't heard of referees' cars getting bombed anywhere else.
Yeah.
Interesting question from James in Mayo in Ireland for both of you, though. With this year's Champions League being full of open attacking football, do the guys think that defensive football is becoming outdated? Because apart from Simeone and Mourinho, all the coaches at top clubs seem to favour fast attacking football, and the art of defending seems to be becoming extinct. Paul first.
Yeah, I don't think it will ever. I think fashions come and go, don't they? Not just in football, but in every aspect of life. And the successes in recent times of Barcelona, I think, have inspired many to continue that sort of Cruyffian total football, methodology. And maybe a generation ago, it was Arrigo Sacchi's AC Milan that inspired those defensive coaches. But I think we are seeing a situation where Jose Mourinho is being exposed as slightly outdated, although he's young enough and smart enough and good enough to change. I don't think he's so set in his ways that's it for Mourinho. I think that we'll see a renewed Mourinho next season in charge of Manchester United. That's for sure.
Tim?
Well, I think here it is appropriate to talk about business model, because I think we tend to underestimate the effect that television has had on football. And we're old enough to remember when there was hardly any live football on TV. Now, you got your tournaments, and you had the FA Cup final. That's why it was so big, because it was the only club game. You usually had the European Cup final, sometimes the Cup Winners' Cup final. You had a few England games, and that was it. Now, you think what a change it is. The mass market that there is now in TV rights. And it's proved, I think, an absolute total game changer, because now you can appeal to so many people. Your audience is no longer just the fans of the club. Your audience is a global audience of not only potential fans, but also of just interested neutrals. And then part of the business model becomes to appeal to as many people as possible. And when I think about the changes that cricket has gone through in the nearly 25 years that I've been away, it's a much more ambitious attacking game now than it was then. Runs are scored at a much, much faster rate than was the case 25 years ago. There was much more of a more ambitious interpretation of what is possible. And a similar thing is happening with football as well. The clubs with their global brands, they want to attract this global audience. So one of the first things that happened was that football cleaned up its act. And if you look at old games, some of the tackling that was going on in those games, it wouldn't have got a yellow card these days or a red card. It would have got a jail sentence. Football, once it started wanting to appeal to a global audience, it cleaned up its act. And, it's a little bit like someone who's going on TV, so he buys a new suit. You want to present your best face to the screen. And it's also meant, I think, that there is much, much more of an incentive now to produce an attractive spectacle. And it's tipped the balance in favour of attacking football. And people like Mourinho does start looking like a throwback. And Simeone has got a club there which is allowing him to punch really above his weight based on old-fashioned methods. But the really big clubs, they are looking to attack and to score goals and to press. And part of this also is the physical development of the game, allowing people to press and to run high up for greater periods than was possible even, say, 30, 40 years ago. More money in the game also means that there's more incentive for players to take care of themselves physically. But I think there's been a huge, huge game changer, and it comes back for me to the concept of business model. Now, what is interesting for me is that that should apply in South America as well, because the clubs are totally dependent on TV money, but we haven't gone through anything like the same changes. Yes, I think the game is probably cleaner in terms of violent fouls than it was, but that's kind of followed the global trend rather than being anything which is developed here. But there hasn't really been any re-evaluation of the value of spectacle, and the idea is still that you win exclusively for your fans. If a global audience of neutrals are interested, well, so be it. But we're not particularly interested in conquering them. And I think that comes down to the fact that although we've said earlier on that football is a strange business, it is a business on some level, and it's much more of a business the way that the European clubs are in comparison with the way that the South American clubs are, where they're social membership clubs, where the president is an elected position. So the dispute for power is going on inside the club, and that makes it easier to take your eye off the global audience. But for me, the root cause of this attacking football, I think, is television and the possibility of attracting a massive a global audience of hundreds of millions.
Yeah, and talking of that, just on that business model note, I think it's an appropriate time, Paul, for you to ask me why I'm sticking the boot into the spuds.
Oh, yeah.
On this program, yeah. Do you want to ask me so that I don't have to declare an interest? You know,
why are you sticking your boot in, Dalton?
Well, let's do it more
Not
kind
like
of.
you.
Let's just do it kind of informally. Funny enough, I'm not wearing any boots tonight, but let's do it kind of informally. Let's just make out as if I'm just going along, and then you ask the question naturally, as if it's the first thing that's come up here. So here I am doing the old Guy Mitchell.
Dotson, you're sticking your boot in on Tottenham this evening. What's going on there? What's the story?
Funny you should ask that, Paul, because there I was, just minding my own business, singing the blues.
Waiting at the church.
Yeah, exactly. I go along on Monday. Well, we should start on Sunday, okay? There's a guy that I know who comes to my door, not to see me. He makes out like he's coming to see me, but he's actually coming to see how shall I put this very blatantly? The girl that he fancies, yeah? So, you know, when those guys knock on your doors like, how you doing, mate? How you doing? And he's sniffing round the lady that he admires, who happens to be in your vicinity. So he's been doing this for a while. The other day, he had no excuse to show up on my door. He suddenly produces these free tickets to go and see the Spuds at Wembley. And he's like, yeah, Dalton, I just came around because I have these free tickets, you know, did you fancy going to see the Spuds at Wembley? There I am. I grabbed them off him like I'm Didier Drogba. I grabbed them off him, and then I started calling my cousin, all these people. Yeah, we're going to Wembley. We're going to Wembley. Everybody was singing along with me. We're having such a great time. And we got to Wembley on Monday night, where the Spuds were playing Watford. Spuds scored within about 10 or 15 minutes. You think, okay, come on. Oh, by the way, it's about a third empty in there, yeah, which begs the question as to whether they're going to be able to fill that other stadium.
Was it Dalton, or was it 2/3 full?
Good point.
Yeah. You could put half empty. My cup is always half empty, mate. Especially when I go to see the Spuds on a cold night in, it was still April at that time. Anyway, so there we are, and it's the most boring game I've ever seen in my life. The Spuds win 2-0. It's the most boring game I've ever seen in my life, which is why I'm talking about the business model. I think part of what has changed is that those people, the chairman and the owners
Here we
I
go.
apologise. Do you want to go and get your door, Tim?
Go.
Do you want to go and get your door? Do you want to go and get your door?
I'll translate that one. He said, Dalton, if you thought that was boring, you should watch some Venezuelan football.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's exactly what he said. But I wonder whether it's not the chairman, the owners of clubs who have said, you've got to be more entertaining for not just the TV audience, but for those people who pay their money to come and see, well, apart from me, of course, who got the tickets for free, but everybody else who pays their money to come and see a decent game of football, because they're not going to come back to the stadium if they think that the football you play is boring.
I think that the people who come through the turnstiles, Dalton, have become the least important in football, and we've seen a progression towards that over a number of years. And the high ticket prices in a time when ticket. You know, it used to be that you ran your football club with what came through the turnstiles on the day, and you know, with corporate sponsorship and TV allocation money and prize money these days, the money that comes in from the supporters who go to the games is almost insignificant amount of money to most top level football clubs. And you know, it's an interesting example really, because we've got a situation now where Wembley has not been paid for completely by the Football Association, and it looks like it's about to be sold to to the Jacksonville
Shahid
Jaguars.
Khan.
Shahid Khan, the owner of Fulham, and you know. But I think part of the deal is that the Football Association get to keep Club Wembley, and they get to keep the income from that, which is something like £300 million over the course of 3 or 4 years.
I had to stand in the queue for the whole of half time to get a couple of chips. I had to stand in queue, and I'm not happy about that Club Wembley business. But just on another note, just very quickly, what do you guys think I should do with regards to this young man who's sniffing around my door? Should I demand tickets to see the Champions League final next time? Because clearly this giving me tickets to see the Spuds is of no use to me whatsoever now.
Well, it's better than Charlton. I think if he'd have come around with Charlton, I'd have sent him away with a flea in his ear.
Okay, so it's like that. Okay, it's like, you see, Tim, I wasn't the one who declared war on Sarah's. Yeah, you get that? Okay, we'll come back to that later on. But first, let's go to Marvin in Egypt. Good morning, Marvin.
Good morning, Dalton. Please, if the one has come sticking for at your door and gives you the Champions League final ticket, please give me one. Please.
Come on, hang on. I have to put up with somebody sniff around my door, and I'm supposed to share the discomfort with you.
I don't know, but please, I'm just trying to be nice to get one. Okay. Yeah, I can do anything for you.
I'll tell you what, if he does come, no, I'm gonna, as long as I can fly to Egypt at your cost to give you the tickets personally, that's cool, no problem.
Yeah, I'm ready to do that.
That's the deal. That's the deal. And by the way, I've been to Egypt, and I really, truly loved Egypt. You know, it's a wonderful country and brilliant people as well. I really enjoyed my time there.
Yeah, thanks. I would like to go to England, actually, and enjoy the people like you and others.
Okay, you're not related to anybody who came over on the Windrush, are you?
What? I didn't hear that.
Don't worry, it's just an English joke. You won't get it. You won't get it tonight. Everybody else in Britain was roaring around with laughter at that one, but anyway. Yeah, go ahead.
So, obviously, I'm a Liverpool fan. Maybe you have known from the Champions League ticket I wanted. And coming up is the most important game in my entire fan history.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll see the Champions League final. I supported Liverpool on the Champions League final of 2007, and we unfortunately lost it. And since then, we won only one trophy. Maybe the problem is in me. Anyways, I have a question. I'm a Liverpool fan from really about 11 years ago. I've been so passionate about Liverpool. I'm very, very happy that we've gone to this game, the Champions League final. And I never stepped in Anfield Road. I've never gone to Liverpool. I've never gone to England. And I barely know anything about Liverpool as a city. But I'm really passionate about Liverpool Football Club. I love this team. I don't know. Is this what makes football the most popular sport in the world? Is it that because the amount of passion fans give to the game and the amount of reward about how happy I feel when Liverpool win, how a game could be changed by a 90-minute goal or I don't know, but my theory is I think that the unpredictability of football than other sports. I think I read in a book that football, the top dog in a football game, about 54 or 55% win a football game. Then the underdog. I don't know if it makes any sense, but in other sports like baseball, basketball, it's 74% to 80%. So it's more unpredictable in Egypt. In Egypt, what is Egypt? In football, than any other sports. I think this is what makes football really, really special. But I would like to
But
to know the opinions of Tim.
Yeah, before we get the opinions of Tim and Paul, with your permission, gentlemen, there's a couple of questions I think we might want to ask Marwin about his support. First of all, I'll ask the first one, and then I'll open up to Tim and Paul, who I'm sure is interested and fascinated by your support as I am.
Yeah.
How and why did you choose Liverpool to support, and what do you know about? Because it's a team and a city and people, Scousers, who have got a rich history and culture, not just around football and other things. How much do you know about the social and historical resonance of Liverpool Football Club? First, how did you start in supporting Liverpool, and why?
So, I support Liverpool. First, know about Liverpool from my teammate at school. His name is Abdurrahman. He supported Liverpool from 2005 final. It was crazy, and he told me about it. I really didn't have a team other than in Ahli in Egypt. So I saw the semi-final. I didn't remember in 2007 who we played. I saw a bit of it, and I against AC Milan. I'm still young, about 10 or 11, I think. I seen the first half, then I was really sleepy, and I woke up the second day, and I found that Liverpool have been beating 2-1. I was really sad, and from this point, I started supporting Liverpool. I know a lot about Liverpool, the city, and the Scousers, and I tried to talk some Scouts,
I'm going to test you. I'm going to test you on that in a minute. You set yourself up for that. I'm going to test you on that in just a minute. But I'm going to hand over to Paul and Tim, because, gentlemen, this is the most important game of Marwin's football supporting life coming up, the Champions League final. Any questions for him from you?
I can't wait for your and Dotton's and Marwan's scouse off that is imminent.
No, I'm not getting involved. I'm not getting involved. We're just going to test him.
That was pretty good. It was better than Dotton's, to be honest.
Better than Tim's, more importantly. It's a shocker.
I'm sorry, Father, but you're not on.
Go on. Any other questions for him, Paul?
Yeah, no, but just a comment really about. Sorry to put my serious hat on for just a second. I'm not sure that football is as unpredictable. Certainly these days, as Marwan wants to believe that it is.
Hang on, Brighton beat Manchester United tonight.
Yeah, I mean, is it? United lost to the two other promoted clubs into the Premier League this season away from home this campaign. Is it that far from the realms of possibility that they would have lost tonight with nothing really left to play for in the Premier League other than who comes second and who comes third? I mean, it's, I think that the vast majority at United are probably on World Cup mode already, 5.5 weeks away. So, the players that are involved know that they can't win the title. They know that they can't drop out of the top four and Champions League qualification. They might be playing for new contracts.
They can still win the FA Cup, can't they?
Yeah, of course, but that's not going to be affected by the game this evening. It's a long trip. It's a late game. I just don't. It's not as look. Let's take the example of the Champions League. In the last 10 seasons, we've had essentially 5 clubs populate the semi-final positions. 8 times, the usual suspects: Barcelona, Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, Juventus. It's become a procession, really. It's become infinitely predictable. And even though Real Madrid have been relatively poor domestically, they've still won the last 2 titles. And I don't want to sound like I'm on a downer about
you should.
Football, but
speak your mind, man. Speak your mind.
I just think that it's not as unpredictable. Certainly not at the Champions League level, and certainly not at the business end of the Champions League. Is far from unpredictable. Leicester City winning the Premier League, that is what makes football an incredible thing. last minute goals that Marwan's talking about, the situations that we'll have over the next couple of match days in the Premier League at the bottom, the miracles. We love to throw that word around in football journalism. The miracle of staying up on the last day of the season, the stories, the human stories. I think that the banner that was displayed by Jordan Henderson, the Liverpool team, about Sean Cox, about him being on their minds when they've just qualified for the Champions League final, that personal touch that football unites everybody, and I think those things are what make football special, rather than the unpredictability of what happens in 90 minutes on the pitch. And look, it doesn't matter how Marwan has come to be a Liverpool supporter. He feels that passion for the club, and nobody can take that away from him. And if he goes to Anfield one day, it'll be an almost religious experience, and that's how football touches people.
Would you advise him to get a ticket in the Kop end, to be in the midst of all of that religious experience, or to get a ticket? Or to get a ticket elsewhere in the stadium where he can watch the Kop in action, as it were.
I think he's got to be in the Kop.
I'd like to be involved. I would like to hear every song. I would like to sing every song, every chant, and I'd like to be in the Kop. Yeah.
Tim,
it's an incredible place to go and watch a game of football. There's no doubt about that, and there are places like that around the world that stand up to it. I mean, go to Istanbul and watch a game. It's an almost religious experience.
But the only game he wants to watch in Istanbul was when Liverpool. Exactly. So that's been done and dusted when Liverpool won the Champions League there. So Tim, any questions or comments for Marwan as he approaches the most important game of his football supporting life?
What this really exemplifies is how football is a mechanism for making people feel represented. And that is so strong. And why does this happen more with football than with any other sport? I think there are two reasons. I think one does have to do with unpredictability. I take Paul's point that an imbalance of economic forces is leading to a concentration of talent. But there's still a basic thing with football, which is the best side does not always win. And in almost any other sport, the best side wins. But football, because the goal it's a low-scoring game. It's becoming a higher-scoring game, but it's still a low-scoring game. So you can be that side who is dominated, who doesn't have the majority of possession, doesn't have the majority of chances, but your one chance went in and theirs didn't. And so there is that element of unpredictability about the result that is absolutely enchanting. And the other thing, I think, is the nature of the activity itself. And football is such a fluid game. You can do anything. It has such the wide range of movements and options of decisions that football entails. You can pass the ball to the side, forwards, backwards, in the air, diagonally, long or short. You don't have to pass it. You can dribble it. And so different schools of football adopt different ways of moving the ball around the pitch and value different things within the game. And all of this helps people feel represented by the end product. So I think that's the end line. There is nothing like football in sporting terms for making people feel represented.
Yeah. Marwan, thank you very much for the call. And incidentally, if there's anybody who wants to make Marwan's dream for the Champions League final,
bring him over.
Well,
no, better than the Champions League final. Bring him over to a Liverpool game.
Yeah. Why not? Go on. Are you lot going to chip in then, Tim? How much are you going to put towards that?
Good point. I'll get back to you.
Speak to your missus first. Speak to your missus first.
Speaking of that, Don, actually, I know you probably want to go to the news, but
of course we want to go to the news. It's 3:30 after all.
Yeah, well, let's talk about it after then, because it's quite good.
No, go on, make the point very quickly. Hang on. Let me just ask Joe. Joe, do you mind if he makes a point or not?
No, go on.
Go on.
It better be good, but yeah,
Thanks,
go on.
Joe. No,
it
it's
better
good.
be good.
Bars.
You heard her.
I read this on the BBC Sport website the other day, so obviously it's good content. There's a young man called Jesus Sanchez, a Spanish lad, who became through playing a computer game became a big fan of Rochdale, And Rochdale supporters have done exactly this. They've had a whip round, and they've brought him over for the final game of the season against Charlton, with survival at stake. So he might, he might have his heart broken by a football club. And let's be honest, who hasn't had that happen?
I'm sorry, but if it's the difference between us making the playoffs or not, I'm sorry. I will have to declare an interest. But thank you for that. Yeah, you get a 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10. I'll give him an 8 out of 10 in terms of quality of story. So, World Football Phony this morning is Europe and South America and players from over there playing in our leagues. You will know, as well as the legend Gene over in South America even, taking care of your questions and comments on football from over there and their players. We've got Paul Serres, the Galaxy Serres, with us as well, taking care of Europe. And you remember, just before we went to the news, he waylaid us with the story of the South American football fan who has been Spanish. Sorry, apologies. I've got South America on my brain now that I said South Africa. Who was brought over to see, which team was it?
Rochdale.
And do you remember how rude not rude, but Joe Hornby allowed you to tell that story, gave you permission.
Very gracious.
Yeah, very gracious. Well, she's got one for you now.
All right.
And are you willing to allow her to be as polite as she was with you? Hello, Joe.
Hello.
God, you're on tenterhooks today, aren't you? Tonight,
I am.
You can't even concentrate on reading the news for us, can you? Although you've done it very well. I'm not saying you haven't done it.
What are you saying?
No, I'm saying you've read the news very well for somebody whose mind is on the game later on today.
Yes, I am. I'm going to attempt to be conscious when I get to Coventry to watch Coventry City in a big game this afternoon against Morecambe. So we need a point to secure our position in the playoffs, and Morecambe could be relegated.
Well, is Morecambe coming with Wise as well? No, sorry, that's bad joke. Yeah, I know it was bad. It was bad.
You can just see me glaze over then.
You looked
Not
at
now,
me.
Alfred. Not now, Alfred.
She looked at me.
Can I make Joe jealous at this point?
Yeah, go on.
Go on, then.
I went to college in Coventry, or in a field outside
She's
Coventry.
not jealous yet.
No, I've been there for a long time. I've got to be honest. I went to college in Coventry as well.
My last year there was 1987. And I followed them uphill and down Dale.
Yeah.
I didn't follow them to the final because they were against my team. But one of my finest memories from football is going up to the semi. I went up to the semi-final, which was Hillsborough. Against Leeds. It was a huge game. It was a massive, massive game. It was a dramatic semi-final. Coventry won 3-2. And one of my favourite memories is coming back into the city in a coach, and the entire city had come out to greet us back, like returning heroes, because, this was the biggest thing, bar the bombing of the cathedral. This was the biggest thing that ever happened to Coventry.
Lampposts and everything.
And what bigger than Lady Godiva riding?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, riding as she was.
I've got it on a VHS somewhere.
Yeah.
the big
Lady
homecoming.
Godiva?
No, not Lady Godiva, not quite that old. No. That'd be amazing, wouldn't it?
It would be. And they recreate that Lady Godiva riding through. Yeah, they do, don't they? Completely naked, though? Do they do it completely naked?
Well, it's a very small Lady Godiva,
Yeah.
so it's very difficult to see anything if there was anything on show in the first place.
I wasn't asking you to look on our behalf.
No,
I just wanted to know
I
historically.
can't see it from here either.
Okay, neither can I. Well, there you go. Good luck to whichever team is the better team, Morecambe or Coventry.
Sky Blues.
Clearly Coventry.
For
me.
We're journalists.
For me.
We don't have an opinion. You know that. We don't have an opinion. Joe, thank you.
Right.
Really appreciate that. Yeah, and talking about footballing matters still, this is from Jack, who says, this is an important one, actually. I don't know if you know Jack, Joe, but Jack says, long-time podcast listener, but first time I've ever listened live. I'm currently pulling an all-nighter editing Sunday morning show for BBC Radio Stoke. Keep up the great work. Love the show. Do you have an answer for him?
What was the question?
No, it wasn't a question, but he says, keep up the good work.
Keep up the good work.
And we ought to say thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. And please send some of your, carrying on vibes to me, because I'm going to need it later, I think.
Okay, good. You were up all night last night, as you should be in any case. Thank you very much. Miles, the chef, who's a Liverpool fan, says, he just wanted to ask, with Brexit and the Bosman rule, how will it work? Will foreign players be allowed to play after we leave the EU?
Well, I think, I mean, football will be treated the same as every other industry. And I think the good people at the Home Office and the bad people there as well, I'm sure there are some, will be very busy processing work permit applications from many more players who want to come and play their football in England, I think, after Brexit. I'm sure that the same rules will apply. And I mean, there's an argument to say that limiting the freedom of movement of European players may turn out to be a good thing for the English national team. I mean, if the same work permit criteria is rolled out for players from within the EU as it is from outside of it, which is 80% of international games played in the last 2 years, then obviously we're going to have a situation where only the better end of player is going to be coming in to play their football in the English leagues.
Okay.
So
question. Really important question. I just realised I've got to get this one in very quickly, and apologies for cutting you short there, Paul. But Rob in Minnesota, talking of football fans who've never been to see the football team that they support in the country of that support and at the ground of that support. Rob in Minnesota says, I'm a passionate, if recent, Burnley fan and will be flying to England attending the match with Bournemouth next week for my very first game.
Wow.
What should amazing, isn't it? He will be turfing.
He's going to be turfing.
He will be turfing. What should I do before? And I've got some advice for him on this one as well, actually. What should I do before and after the match to be traditional? What do fans do by tradition before and after in the pundits' regions? Let's take South America first, and we'll come to Europe in a moment. What should Rob do before and after the match? If he were coming from South America, what would he do, Tim?
I think that these things are largely international. It's because what it is, it's a process of lots of ones coming together to form a many. So, you ideally, you want to feel part of that many before you go to the stadium. So, you want to go to a pub or something like that around the ground, near the ground. You want to feel the atmosphere of the game build up. And I love doing that going on public transport. That's one of my favourite things about going to the game. When you're going to the game, you're beginning on the way on the underground or whatever. You're beginning to feel the experience of that game. Now, I'm going as a kind of neutral observer, as a journalist. But if you're going as a fan, then I think as early as possible, you want to you want to fuse your one with the many who will be turfing on that occasion.
And Paul, let's give him some advice in terms of Burnley. Anything specifically that he should be doing before or after the game?
Well, again, not wearing a blue and white shirt.
Yeah, no, I was coming to that. I was coming to Tim. That was my best shot. I was coming to that.
Don't do that. Yeah, don't. You'll regret it.
You're up in Burnley.
You'll regret it.
Sorry, my accent's worse than yours.
Blackburn.
Yeah, whatever. So, Paul?
Well, yeah, I mean, as Tim said, it's eat, drink, be merry, and do those things that have been done by generations before and will continue to be done by generations, and that's, go and enjoy it and drink it in metaphorically and literally, and go and have a few ales and maybe go and watch a non-league game on the Saturday afternoon and support grassroots football as well as the Premier League game as well, and enjoy it. And also,
Oswald's whistle.
Exactly.
They'll be needing some supporters.
Yeah, of course they will. And they've done very well this season, obviously.
It segues nicely, actually, into something that I think probably deserves a mention, and that's that we are hosting, that is England, the Euro, the under-17 Euros at the moment that kicked off today, being hosted in the East Midlands and South Yorkshire, so it's not, scamper across the Pennines. And
we are also hosting, and that is England, Nigeria coming to Wembley very soon, so don't miss out on that one. And my suggestion, Rob, is that you get there really, really early. I'll tell you why, because Burnley is one of those towns where it's a one football team town. Yeah, every single person in Burnley supports one team, and they'll all be wearing the shirts. And that's everybody from the milkman to the shopkeepers. Everybody, they depend on the team, and the team depends on them as well. And that experience of going through a town where literally everybody is wearing claret and blue is an amazing experience. Get there as early as you can and see the whole town, but also experience all of the joys of that.
And also, Don,
afterwards, tell us about it. Tell us about the highlights of the experience, because we love hearing those stories.
It's from Minnesota, right?
Cold Minnesota, where the Purple Prince came from.
Yeah, absolutely, and the Vikings and the Twins and the Timberwolves.
And let's not forget Bob as well. No, not Marley, the other Bob.
Which Bob?
Oh, Tim, did you hear that? Which Bob?
I'm struggling. I'm not great on Minnesota. Even though I live on the 20th floor and it's 20 Flight Rock and I'm too tired to rock, I'm not great on Americana.
I was going to pick you up on that 20 Flight Rock earlier. Used to be one of my favourite songs, but you've killed it tonight for me twice. I'm going to redeem Eddie Cochran later on.
You know the importance of 20 Flight Rock.
George Harrison, of course it was.
No, it was Paul McCartney. It was Macca.
Well, yeah,
Macca knew the lyrics of 20 Flight Rock, and that got him in a band with John Lennon.
Listen, I know the lyrics as well. Well, I walked 1, 2, 5, 3, 5 rock, 4, 5, 6, 6,
Unfortunately, you're too late to be in a band with John Lennon. That ship has sailed.
I'm too tired to rock. So, Bob Dylan is what I was talking about. Minnesota Bob. Anyway. Yeah, James in Mayo in Ireland. I think we had an email from earlier. Anyway, he says, can you ask the guys which coaching badges are the best to attain in their respective regions?
Coaching badges?
Yeah, which coaching badges?
Well, I mean, it depends really on what you plan to do. If that there are youth modules that you can do, but everything funnels up to UEFA A and B license, and eventually, if you want, the UEFA Pro license.
Okay. How do you think Qatar will get on in the Copa America? Asked Marcus.
Yeah, and the idea with the Copa America, and there are 10 teams, 10 South American teams. So in recent years, they've invited 2. It's usually been it's always been Mexico plus another. Sometimes the United States or Honduras or Costa Rica. Once it was Japan. The idea for next year was they wanted to invite 16, and they wanted to get some Europeans over, and they also wanted to count on the United States and Mexico. They got the kibosh on all fronts. The Europeans can't, because of this new League of Nations type thingy, and this time no Mexico or the United States, because CONCACAF has its Gold Cup, and FIFA regulations they prohibit countries from playing 2 continental tournaments in the same year. So in order to get the numbers up to 12 rather than 10, they've had to scratch to Asia. So Japan coming back, they did it once in 1999, and Qatar coming in. And this is good experience, good tournament experience, I suppose, for them, because they don't have World Cup qualifiers before the World Cup that they'll host in 4 years' time. So it makes sense to them. Makes sense, I think, probably for Japan as well, to have experience against other schools of football. Whether this discredits the whole idea of a Copa America, I will leave to your individual discretion.
Tony in Stirling says the main differences between Barnes and Gerrard is money and quality of players. Barnes spent millions and had players such as Larson, Viduka, Berkovic and Lambert, etc. Barnes' record wasn't...
Did he sign Raphael Scheidt? Can we pin that one on him, as well as pinning it on me?
Funny you should say that, Tim. I was going to save this till the end, but as you brought it up, you see, I was such a gentleman, I thought I won't ask Tim this question immediately. Oh, no, it's not Raphael Scheidt, it's Gabriel Heinz. Oh, what a shame, what a confusion.
Well, I think I got him right all along, so that one's a hard one to pin on me.
Okay, frankly. I'm going to have to ask the question anyway. David in Southampton says, Tim, this concerns another defender, ex-Man United, Gabriel Heinz. I had heard he was in management in Argentina and wondered how he was getting on and if he was doing anything different tactically or was making progress.
Well, he's with Vélez Sarsfield, a Buenos Aires team who've just fallen on hard times, and but he seems to be sorting them out. I think it's something like six wins in a row now. I don't think he's got a great deal of raw material there, and it's still very, very early to judge him as a coach. But I just think he might have a chance long term. I think he's probably a better. I don't want to sound nasty about him, but I think he's probably a better person than a player. I always thought at the top level he wasn't quite a centre-back and he wasn't quite a left-back. I think he fell between those stools a little bit. But he was always in and around the Argentina team and the squad because he was considered such a great bloke to have around. And not only a great bloke, an intelligent bloke as well. So that's a coaching career I think it's probably well worth keeping an eye on. Vélez were doing very, very badly, but he seems to be leading them out of the wilderness. And so often I think, I know there are exceptions, and Guardiola and Zidane are exceptions to this, but so often I think if you start with a smaller club or a club where you really have to fly by the seat of your pants, as Brian Clough did with Hartlepool, I think that can serve you in good stead.
This is a really interesting question, Paul, from Stuart in Paisley, who says, Tim, feel free to join in on this one as well. English football was at an all-time low in the late 80s. Attendance were down, hooliganism was rife, and English clubs were banned from Europe. The average fan had lost interest in the game. Then along came Italia 90, and people slowly started to fall in love with the game again, with England making it to the semi-final. With England doing well, this has been created with the rebirth of the game in England, making it what it is today. My question is, what do you think would have happened if England had been knocked out of Italia 90 in the group stages? Would the game, it's a great question, would the game in England, absolutely, would the game in England be much more different to what we have today, or could it have gone in a totally different direction? Paul first.
Yeah, what a question. I mean, to be honest, I don't even know how to go about answering it. It's coulda, shoulda, woulda on an industrial scale. I think. Can
I have a go first?
Yeah, go for
it.
Please do. Yeah.
I think the same basic mechanisms would have been in operation, but the thing would have taken longer. And the importance of Italia 90, and I lived every minute of that. I loved it. It was one of my great England teams. I had a very strong association with the team. And the importance of it is that it reminded a lot of people of why they used to be in love with football. And it also brought a lot of people to the game for the first time. I think a lot of women included in that. And so it did really help create an audience for the more expensive ticket prices that were starting to be charged as a result of the stadium renovation. So there's no doubt whatsoever that it eased that transition totally. But I think the same basic building blocks were there. You know, the kind of marriage, if you like, between television and football. The cleaning up of the spectacle for television, the need in an atomized individualistic society for a collective ritual. I think it probably would have happened. The same things would have happened had England failed in Italia 90, but I think it just would have taken longer and it would have been a little bit more difficult.
You had some thinking time, Paul.
Yeah, I think I remember it, incredibly well, as I think most people do. Certainly, most English people do, and it did rekindle something. I mean, I was pretty young back then, but I think that time was an important time, and not for the rose-tinted nostalgic reasons alone. You know, we had the Hillsborough disaster at just before Italia 90, and I think that went a long way to really focusing efforts at a governmental level on huge mistakes were made, at the time, but in terms of sanitizing the game and removing elements of the game. I'm not saying those two things are linked, but it brought it to the attention of the powers that be rather than looking to purely punish all football supporters for supporting a football team and for wanting to travel and follow a team. I think it looked at solutions to the issues that have plagued English football. So along with the Italia 90 rekindling a passion for the game in England, I think the clean-up of the game at a governmental level and a re-establishing of order, I think, in terms of the hooliganism issues, went a long way. And also the Bosman ruling was massive. That came a few years after, but that was huge in terms of modernising the game and opening the doors really to the great and good of world football.
Sorry, could I have a punt at this as well? Because you know, normally I don't say anything. All I do is bark the whole phone in. But this time, I do remember it very significantly. And I'll tell you this: at the risk of saying it's all down to Gaza. At the risk of saying that, there was a personification of the Italian 90, which, Tim mentioned to Gary Lineker a moment ago. Somebody wrote a whole play with regards to, it was a play that women loved, Gary Lineker's Thighs and everything. An Evening with Gary Lineker came off the back of that Italian 90. But what I remember most significantly, I was a music journalist at the time, and a record company, when record companies were big, I think it was it Warner Brothers at the time? I think it was Warner Brothers, because I remember the guy that did it. For them to convince people to come out when England were playing, I can't remember which of the matches they were playing, it might have been the quarterfinal or whatever, for them to get journalists to come out to review a band that they had paid for to come all the way from Canada or America or wherever it was, they had to basically invite journalists. They had to book a hotel right next to the BBC, Portland Place, Broadcasting House, to get BBC journalists from Radio 1 and so on. I got invited there as well. They had to book a whole suite there, provide food and everything, with a television for us to watch the match, so that they can then capture us and drag us to this gig afterwards. That was how powerful and how potent it was that other industries were depending on England doing well for us to even consider going out.
And you've never been back to the Langham since?
It wasn't the Langham, it was the cheaper one across the road. It was right next to it. Was They didn't splash out to that extent. If it was a final, maybe. But if we're talking about the quarter-final, no. But
I went there once to interview Dirk Kuyt when Fenerbahce were in town for the Arsenal game, and a fish out of water is putting it lightly, to say the least.
I hope you shined your shoes first. Slobbing away, disgraceful.
Yeah, it used to be really nice around there until I turned up.
Kent in Oakland, California was saying, any insights on pre-match rituals? My buddy and I were just finalising our plans to attend tomorrow's San Jose Earthquakes match. We spent the bulk of our time discussing the details of our pre-match ritual. Here in the US, many fans like to do what we call tailgating, which I've always assumed is a distinctly American ritual adopted from American football. We usually arrive at the stadium parking lots with a few hours before kickoff, take out some lawn chairs, turn on some music, crack open a few beers, and cook sausages, burgers, etc. on small portable grills. It's always been one of my favourite aspects of the match day experience. So it got me wondering, are there any particularly interesting or distinct pre-game rituals for fans in the countries that you panellists cover? We kind of talked about that before, but any specific ones in South America?
I always thought that tailgating, I discovered it a couple of years ago. I thought it was kind of driving around.
It's
illegal. It's got that kind of dynamic.
It's illegal.
It's not. It's just sitting around eating.
Yeah,
but it is, isn't it?
But you pull the flap of your boots down.
Your tailgate.
Yeah, your tailgate, because a boot, of course, is a clamp over there. They don't know what a boot is. Wow, you mean a Denver boot? No, just your tailgate, yeah. Thanks very much, Paul. Thanks very much, Tim. Many thanks.
BBC 5 Live.